The following is a production of UNO Television for KYNE TV. Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Allegiant Health and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Consider this. The American public is so busy worrying about their day-to-day activities, the fate of President Clinton, and what their stock portfolio is doing, that they're not paying close attention to what's happening on the other side of the world. Well, my guests certainly are. Both are well-known around the world, one of them well-known to Omaha, but they are also involved with the Third World Conference, the 21st annual, sponsored by UNO's College of Continuing Studies. Tom Gutierrez, welcome back. I mean, everyone in Omaha welcomes you back. You've been on every radio and television show and on the networks lately because of our friend and his haven in Afghanistan.
Osama bin Laden, yes.
Most recently. Also with us today is Peter Thompson. He is just retired as a U.S. ambassador to Armenia and will be coming back to UNO in January as a ambassador at large?
In residence.
In residence? That's a whole new title
He thinks
to me.
it's at large, but we'll keep him in residence.
Well, that's good.
On a tight leash?
Yeah, on a tight leash, right.
We have so much to talk about, but right now, what's happening in the Balkans is just, we're just missing it because of all that's going on in Washington. I mean, it would be a big story, I think, if it weren't for everything else going on. Isn't that right?
Well, I think it certainly is. I'm sure you agree, Peter. I think the fact that that Secretary of State Albright is sent Holbrooke back to to see Milosevic is an indication that she'd like to see something move there. But we also have to remember in this situation we got allies who are not moving along on the same track as are we. So. But it certainly is a serious situation that could erupt into some kind of military action.
Well, since Cliff's Notes were started in the town of Lincoln, Nebraska, can we have the Cliff's Notes versions of exactly what is happening over there to bring us up to speed? I suppose it takes a couple hundred years worth of Cliff's Notes, but...
Go ahead, Cliff. You do this.
In terms of the Balkans.
Right.
Yes.
What's happening?
I think essentially there are some who still search for a military solution, regional hegemony, and try to use force to get it. It's not going to work. They have to get to the point where they have the political will, or they leave office and their replacements have the political will to reach a political settlement and stop the fighting, compromise, give ground so that everybody benefits from a peaceful situation, everybody benefits from the economic growth that will come. Unfortunately, Milosevic has been the spark plug for the fighting for the last 8 or 9 years, beginning in Croatia, the Krajina area of Croatia, moving to Bosnia, and now in Kosovo. Each place he's been countered. He's going to be countered in Kosovo, but also back home in Serbia, the political elite, the power elite, has to reach an accord, a consensus that the way to the future is not through conflict and war and killing, but through negotiations and peace and dealing with others who aren't like you, accommodating and reaching arrangements which permit economic growth. Right now, the Serbian economy is going south. It's going down, and it will continue to go down. And the Serbian people will continue to suffer as long as Milosevic follows this very militant policy.
Now, the brief atlas. We're dealing with Milosevic is in Yugoslavia,
Yes.
which is,
Which essentially now remains only being Serbia, I think former Yugoslavia and the Balkans kind of offer a textbook picture of the way problems develop around the world, where you have regional conflicts that are predicated upon the tribal or ethnic, and in this case, religion-defining ethnicity differences. I mean, you see these different peoples who are also in other in the other countries now. It used to be regions of Yugoslavia. And the ability to get along and set aside the emotional differences, which is the most difficult part of trying to resolve regional conflicts, is, you know, very, very problematic for the people of former Yugoslavia. They're all Southern Slavs. Ethnically, in an anthropological sense, they're the same. It's that they're defined differently by their religion, and each of them, you know, have had centuries of differences over these things, and they can't get over the emotional humps that those, you know, conflicts have produced. And you can take a look at each of those sections and define them by their specific characteristic, but these characteristics are the seeds for these emotional and passionate differences.
And also for the extremist leaders who push it. Like, for instance, you have different categories of leaders. Unfortunately, many of the communists have been able to stay in power by following an ultra-nationalistic, extremist, even racist or fascist approach, and calling on this inter-ethnic warfare and confrontation. At some point, though, the losses are going to be so great that they'll have to pull back, or other leaders more moderate will have to come forward and move back to the period where everybody, relatively speaking, lived with each other.
Economically, I mean, these are countries that have a long way to go. And what do you have to gain by keeping the pot stirred like that? Not to mention the bloodshed and the loss of lives and the purging of you know, cultural groups, which is what they'd like to do. But if you're trying to develop and become any kind of a financial power in that region, or at least hold your own, what's the advantage of continuing that for any length of time?
That's exactly right. That up until the Dayton Accords, the squeeze was on Serbia, and then the squeeze was lifted to a large extent, and now it's going on again. International sanctions from the Western world, especially. There's nothing to gain, and there's everything to lose. And standards of living are again going down in Serbia, and they'll continue to go down.
I mean,
these are just political interest groups. I mean, these are political interest groups trying to sustain themselves in power, and they're willing to sacrifice the welfare and the economic, you know, prospects. The area itself actually, you know, has great prospects for development, and historically, you know, it's the eastern coast of the Adriatic. There are all kinds of tourist, you know, attractions. There's good fruit and olives and all these kinds of things agriculturally, you know, for cash crops, so it's an area that I think, not unlike the Czech Republic, which kind of, you know, really expanded in terms of its tourist trade since the fall of the Iron Curtain. You know, it could have a lot of advantages as well, but not if there's instability and war. So I think the prospects are not bad. But as Peter indicated, this one individual in particular who has been the kind of the driving force for the ethnic, you know, conflicts in that whole region, continues to push his agenda because he's got a political interest group.
We might sit back here in our comfortable living rooms and, you know, thinking about which playoff game is on tonight, and say, you know, aren't these people any smarter than this? And yet we can look just at Ireland and, you know, the British situation, they after all those years. But you'd think, are we still in our infancy in terms of the third world development? We've got our superpowers and our long-standing European countries that have a long-standing, pretty solid economy and political government. And we say, come on, can't they look around and smell the roses, see, you know, where it's at? We're dealing with a whole mindset here that is kind of in its infancy in terms of some of these areas, these regions that we see as hotspots now or political hotspots of the future. Aren't we? I mean, they're just sort of not, I don't mean to say they're infants, but it's an evolution.
Last night, Peter was talking to a group of people in Omaha, and he was describing how in the past the Soviet Union or the United States were able to kind of keep areas that were potential areas for regional conflict calm as part of the Cold War scenario.
And we said foreign aid kept our people,
That's right.
our little groups happy that were sort of on our side, maybe.
Did a lot
and
of
then they did the same
surrogacies.
thing. Yeah.
Right. But now all those things have exploded all around the world, and there's so many of them. I mean, there's almost a regional conflict for almost every country, and it's difficult. Even countries like Belgium, where they don't fight each other, but they have their own regional conflict over language, as we see here in Quebec in Canada. They're not killing each other, but there's a conflict there over language, and these things I think are becoming more and more a part of our social landscape, and even in our own, the United States, we have problems relating to certain regional considerations having to do with language. Also, issues like pro-life, pro-choice. We're really at a point where we don't find compromise on these issues.
You can add to what Tom said that the end of the Cold War did bring a victory for the West. You had the Soviet Empire versus basically the United States with NATO also. And this confrontation was extremely dangerous. I mean, both sides had tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. All of us remember that period. We were living on the brink of an atomic war, and at times the temperature went up quite high. The Cuban Missile Crisis, and then when the Soviets deployed SS-20s in Europe in the 70s, and then we countered. Eventually the Soviet Empire collapsed because of our policy of containment. So that danger of a global catastrophe is gone. But with the demise of empires, like the Soviet Empire, like Yugoslavia under Tito, you've had these ethnic differences, ancient hatreds rise up, and you have these smaller conflicts. As Tom says, they're in the Caucasus, they're in the Balkans, in Africa, that have been spawned. But there's not the danger, I think we should remember this, there's not the danger today of a superpower conflict. There's really only one superpower now.
And there's not the danger to us.
Yes,
so we feel,
directly.
we feel very comfortable that that's their nasty, dirty little wars. And that we shouldn't be concerned, but we've had a lesson very recently in terms of we are a global economy, certainly, with the stock market in Asia and Latin America. But we don't feel threatened at all by what's going on. I'm sure the State Department worries because they know the ramifications. What are the ramifications to us?
Well, if we're looking at the political and security side, we look at the major power centers around the world. The United States, Western Europe, and China. Also now Russia, but its power is receding all around its periphery with the economic crisis. So as long as a balance and peace and stability can be maintained among the major powers in the world, there'll be a global equilibrium. On the economic side, I think a lot of people in Washington and in Europe and around the world now are wrestling with the economic problems. There was recently the conference, which you've read about, of economic ministers that will now move to an economic summit in London. Tony Blair will host it. How to resolve these economic problems that now transcend national and even regional boundaries, have an effect halfway around the world. At the end of the Second World War, we had the Bretton Woods Conference, and other conferences which set up the World Bank and the IMF. Now we're facing a set of circumstances where everybody has to sit back and look at the global economy and the ills in the global economy and create new institutions and processes to handle what has emerged.
That even has a tie-in to some of these regional problems, is that if we keep the countries stable financially, then they are less apt to, they have more to lose perhaps by engaging in these political vendettas.
Yes.
But Yugoslavia hasn't reached that point yet, and a lot of other countries, certainly in Africa, haven't reached that point, and things could break out. Well, I just hear that there's border skirmishes between Iran and Afghanistan right now.
And the more a region is destabilized, the more it's vulnerable to all of those things that make life problematic for stable countries. Destabilized regions are more likely to be engaged in terrorism, more likely to be engaged in drug trafficking, more likely to be engaged in arms marketing and all those things, because people who are in despair tend to go to extreme measures.
They have less to lose.
They're very vulnerable, very capable of being seduced to anybody who comes up with a kind of a crazy thing. That's why a guy like Osama bin Laden is able to attract supporters. He usually attracts supporters from individuals who are perhaps in a sense of despair, and they turn to extremism, and it's not even extreme Islam what he is espousing. It's a bastardized form. It's a corrupted form, and it doesn't qualify as really being Islam.
But why should I care?
Well,
why should I care sitting
here
watching the Yankees, and hopefully the Yankees and the Braves duke it out?
No, I hope it's exactly the opposite. I hope it's San Diego and the Indians.
I know you did, so that's why
right.
because you Ohioites.
Yeah, right. That's right. But I think the thing we got to worry about is that we like the good life in Nebraska, and instability of any kind, whether it's economic or that caused by regional conflicts or terrorism, whatever it is, has an impact on the capacity of Nebraskans to live the good life, because we rely upon our ability to market everywhere. And so much of our products in this state, whether they be telecommunications products, other service products, or agribusiness products, they go out. There's one fellow we were talking about earlier who has all these hog systems that he has marketed to a place like China. If China's economy is destabilized for whatever the reason, that's going to have an impact on Nebraska. And we've just got to, I think, always remember, here as we sit watching the World Series, that these things have an impact on our lives, and will do that even more in the future, because our lives are tied to people in other parts of the world. And it's always going to be that way, and it's going to grow even more so that way, and we have no going back. There's no chance of that.
We can't be isolationists anymore.
No.
The 21st century is going to be more integrationist. There are now about 500,000 foreign students in the U.S. The foreign exchange the U.S. earns from foreign students exceeds the foreign exchange levels we earn from agricultural exports.
Really?
Here in Omaha, you earn what, 12 million?
Last year, the contribution of the foreign student in Omaha at both UNO and UNMC, I'm not talking about Creighton and Bellevue and the rest, brought in more than $12.5 million to the local economy. It is fifth on the list of service exports in terms of total money earnings for the United States. So that's just one area. Now,
I never thought of students as affecting the balance of trade.
Yeah.
And all of that, of course, is consumed right here. And so if the economy of Korea declines, the number of students coming from Korea to the United States declines, that has an impact on the economy, and it has declined. And same thing with the students from Indonesia or Malaysia or Thailand, Japan and China. All these students all these countries contribute a large number in the exchanges. There's a problem also now in Brazil, and the numbers there are perhaps going to decline.
And foreign students want to come to the U.S. We have the finest educational institutions in the world, even from Britain, which has very fine educational institutions. A lot of British students come to the States, Canadian students, Asian now students are flocking to the U.S., and that will also only go up in the future. In answer to your previous question, too, we have to proceed cautiously in international politics. We can't become the policeman of the world.
The big stick isn't going to cut it.
We have to watch it. We can't overextend ourselves. I mean, we might want to get involved in some cases. Humanitarian issues might be horrendous, but we have to watch it. We can't get sucked in where we are dissipating our resources to the extent that our power at home goes down as our federal government's budget goes up and our deficit goes up, because we're overextended. Many empires in history have fallen because of overextension. The answer to this is to proceed in consensus and coalition with other countries. We just provide a share of what's necessary. Like in the IMF, I think that an $18 billion input now into the IMF will be matched by $75 billion from other countries. We have to look to ourselves to still lead, to be the major force for molding the institutions and processes that are going to guide us in the next century. But we also have to work with others and leverage others to contribute, if possible, more. Like, for instance, in the Gulf War, Japan provided $13 billion for the Gulf War. That's because they benefit from oil exports.
Absolutely.
In Bosnia, too, we have to work with the Europeans, the Japanese, and others to get them to invest.
Let me ask this, and I don't want to make this a politically charged question, but it seems it's not effortless, but considering everything that's going on in Washington, Secretary of State Albright, all the Richard Holbrooke, they all do their thing unaffected. But is the process of leveraging our power isn't the right word, our advantages and using our leverage.
Yeah, we are the most influential.
Is that inhibited at all by what's going on in Washington?
Not at this point. I think everybody considers the president to be in complete control and
the system is in place, the way we do business in state.
Yes, and we have a great regenerative capability, flexibility. So Washington continues to work normally, despite this crisis. Over time, what I don't want to predict what will happen over time, but now it's stable and secure, and foreign policy making and implementation has not been affected.
Because that's been a lot of the criticism, maybe actually a small part in the whole scheme of the Clinton. I always want to say affair, but I shy away from that word. But the whole Clinton thing is that he's not going about the business of being president. And granted, we have a lot of domestic issues that are not being voted on.
You know, one of the advantages of a governmental system that has bureaus or bureaucracies is that
when we curse them, we should think of the good side.
They also have professionals who are involved in the managing and the carrying on of the affairs of those bureaus. And I think in the case of our foreign affairs, and better I say this than someone who has just recently retired from that I think it's the most able bureaucracy that I've ever dealt with in terms of the knowledge and ability of the individuals who are therein employed. And I think that these people are busy about these things. It requires, of course, an Albright being in touch with the president to say this is an issue that we need to be, dealing with, and it requires the president to react and say, okay, go ahead with that. And I don't think that his other problems, need to be so overwhelming just as other issues. A president has to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. He has to be able to deal with these problems and also deal with these issues. And I think currently the system, as Peter suggests, enables him to continue to do that. I think where we have to be concerned is if this process goes through the whole impeachment situation like it did with Nixon, where I feel that his ability to lead had been impeded. We'll have to see whether or not this process relating to Clinton will go that far.
Well, it's hard to keep your poker face if you get to the point where everybody knows your hand. And if we went down the road, let's say, and I don't want to, but impeachment became possibly imminent. I mean, like in the next week, in the next month. It's hard to. It might be a critical moment at that time. It may not be, so then it may not be a big issue. But I see the whole State Department engaging in a game that's long-standing in its strategy and such as chess as compared to Monopoly or Trivial Pursuits. I mean, the people that have trained have a whole legacy of people in every nation that's been established of knowing what the strategy is, how to work it. It's not a new game.
Right. Mm-hmm. And there's an interagency process. There's different levels of interagency mechanisms, state, CIA, defense, National Security Council, and they are always going forward, fine-tuning policy, doing policy reviews, strategic policy reviews, and that goes on at the sort of subterranean bureaucratic level. When you want the president engaged, then up goes the paperwork to the White House and the president, and a speech or whatever you sign here, and please sign off on this. But as Tom said, the foreign policy making bureaucracy is really in the post-war period, become quite sophisticated, and like you mentioned, the wheels are well oiled.
I think, though, that sometimes when we look at the front page of the paper or we watch the news, that that business over there, whatever the business of the moment happens to be, if it's in Yugoslavia, even if it's in Ireland, even some of the many countries in Africa that just can't seem to get along with their neighbor, in fact inventing whole new countries inside of them, that they say, well, I'll read this and I'll read that, but you know, I can't get in on that because I don't understand. You know, I flunked geography to begin with, and then, you know what I mean? There's this reticence of the everyday person that they're willing to engage in the other news and keep up on it, but it's just kind of hard.
You know, I think you really do understand it, and I think a lot of Americans do understand it. It's not all that problematic to understand. I think more than anything else, we live in an age of trying to select what it is we're going to you know, follow. And
our mental energies.
Yeah, we have a lot of, not just information overload, kind of a popular and overused phrase, but we also have so many things that are competing for our time. You know, all kinds of entertainment things through the television, the internet, and that it's very difficult for us to give up some of any of our time to kind of focus in on these things international. And I think, unfortunately, our news media tend to present these world events mostly only in the crisis mode, and we don't have an awful lot of depth in coverage. I think, you know, a chance for people to sit and talk like this, and then for people to take a half an hour out of their time to listen to something like this, you know, assuming that we have something to offer, you know, is a real stretch for people. And so it's just competing for people's attention. I think it's really problematic, and I notice it in class even, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, Peter, if you had one pitch as a veteran of state to impress upon people, not, you know, why you should do this or why you should pay attention, but what would you say to them about how important this is as an American citizenry to keep up at least cursory knowledge of this?
Right. I would urge that that Americans watch the evening news programs because they have domestic and foreign policy coverage in a general way, and read at least one news magazine a week, you know, Time, Newsweek, The Economist, or American
Just to make
Heritage.
that commitment.
Yeah,
just
to make that commitment. And then when you read the morning newspapers, don't skip, and you don't have to read in detail because there's so much to read, but skim the headlines and the sub-headlines and the main points in events that are taking place in the world.
Well, we've run out of time, so if you spent the time, at least it was well spent. And did I mention that you're Dean of International Studies? Thank you, Tom Gutierrez. Thank you, Peter Thompson.
Thank you
for joining us at UNO on Consider This.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Consider This with Carol Schrader is made possible with support from Allegiant Health,